Well, good morning. It's good to be with you all again. I think we've been back once, maybe since then, but that was the missions conference where Cheryl was great with child, and we weren't sure when the baby was coming. So I think it was a Tuesday night or Wednesday. I can't remember. It was a Tuesday night, and the missions. I was trying to remember on the drive over here. Did I come back Wednesday? I don't even remember if I came back that Wednesday or not. I don't know, but I know Micah was born, so that was a great memory for us. And well, I want to take some time this morning. Thank you, Pastor Wiggins, for the chance to do this, to share with you all where we're at as far as our ministry in Peru and our family and what things are going on. And if I have time at the end, I'll open it up for questions for you. And later on in the service, I'll have a chance to open the Word and preach to you. Let me introduce my family here. You can see in the picture. Is there a way to turn out these lights, or can you see it clearly enough there? Okay. Yeah, so there's our, now I'm in the dark, but that's okay. It's better to see the pictures than to see me here. So Lauren's our oldest, and she is 16. Micah, as Pastor Wiggins mentioned, is 13, and then Abby is 12. And we've been in Peru just over 12 years, about 12 and a half years. Abby, Cheryl was pregnant with Abby when we moved there, and Abby was born there about 5 months after we moved there. And Calvary Baptist Church here nearby in Midland is our home church. That's where Cheryl grew up at, and her parents have been in the church there for a long, long time. And so ever since we began in missions work, that's our home church. And they have actually 2 mission homes, and so whenever we come back on any kind of a furlough, then we're able usually to stay in one of those homes. And so we got back this time at the very end of February, and this is a 5-month trip, so we're about 3 months of the way through it. We've been in, I think, 10 or 11 churches in the last 3 months, and we have, after being with you all today, we have 3 or 4 more churches to be with, and then, Lord willing, the last day of July, we will fly back, and August 1st, we'll be there back in Lima, Peru. So let me just give you a little map there so you can kind of picture where we're at. If you look at the little inset there, you can see where Peru is located in South America. So you can get your bearings. Actually, from where we're at here in Michigan, I know we're on the western side of the Eastern time zone. Peru is actually in what would be equivalent to the Central time zone for us, yet they're actually further east than we are. So Peru lines up somewhere about with Georgia and maybe the western part of North Carolina as far as where it's located geographically. It's about 10 degrees south of the equator, so we're definitely in the tropics. And let me just point you to where we live there, the capital city of Lima, Peru. Lima has about 10 million people. And the biggest issue for us, one of the biggest issues for us, I guess you could say culturally, adjusting to the culture there, was just the reality of living in a large city that hasn't done a whole lot of city planning in the last 20 years. They've done some, but traffic is a major, major issue. Where our church is located downtown, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But on Sundays, we can get to our church from where we live in a half an hour. On a Friday night, it would be an hour and a half if we're lucky. And we quit scheduling things on Friday nights or even most nights during the week because of the traffic issue. And that's some of the reality we live in there. Let me just give you a chance to understand a little bit about the whole country. The Peruvians think of their country in 3 different sections, and you can go from west to east. So on the western Pacific side there, they just call it the coast. It's actually desert. So we live in Lima, and it doesn't feel like a desert because you're in a large city, but as soon as you leave the city, you actually feel like you're driving onto the moon. It's so dry. There's places you don't even see cactus, you don't see anything. All you see are these hills, and with nothing on them. If because you're right on the coast, there are places along the coast there, where the moisture will come in and settle, and so you will have some greenery, but very sparse and very dry, and that runs all the way up and down the coast there. However, there's not much coastal land because almost immediately the Andes Mountains start to come up, and the mountains are just tremendous. We live in Lima. There really wasn't much of a traffic issue from where we live, we could pretty easily be at the Pacific Ocean, say if I drove in the middle of the night, in about a half an hour. So we're not that far from the Pacific Ocean. If I got in my car and drove about 2.5 to 3 hours, not going very fast, an average of maybe 35 miles an hour, we could actually be at 16,000 feet above sea level on the road. And the Andes, that's just that first valley that runs and gets over into the first pass over into the first major valley. And there's actually about 4 ranges of the Andes. They span just hundreds of miles wide, a large portion of that, the western part of the country there. And once you get over the Andes, then you go into the final section of the country, which is the jungle. And so the large part there in the north, and then a part that sticks out in the southern part, those are what they call the north and the southern jungles. And it is rainforest, so all the water, the rain we don't get on the one side of the Andes is because they get it all on the other side of the Andes. And so very unique, each section of the country, the people that come from those sections. In Lima, we have a lot of people that have come in from those parts, and they're very, their accent is different, the way they pronounce words, the way they talk, the way they go about life. The people from the jungle tend to be more laid back because that's the nature of jungle life. You don't actually have to work that hard to survive. You can always go fishing or find fruit that's just dropping off the trees. You can survive without having to really pace your plan and work. So the people tend to be more laid back. The people in the mountains tend to be a little more, actually harder workers. They have to plant so they can reap. They tend to be kind of a harder personality too because they're used to a harder way of life and very industrious, but tend to be a little harder in the way their personality and so forth. And the people on the coast, because a lot of the money is concentrated on the coast, there's actually the people on the coast tend to look down a little bit on the mountain people or on the jungle people. So a lot of dynamics like that in the capital city there where we live. Well, when we moved to Peru 12 and a half years ago, we went there with the intention that I would do a lot of itinerant preaching, evangelistic campaigns and conferences, camp ministry. And so within about a year or so, we began to really do that full time. We found out it's hard to travel with a family. So a lot of the times I was gone and Cheryl was there with young children. It wasn't a good idea long term for us. We started to realize this is going to be hard, and so we started to concentrate on the churches in Lima. So I would go and preach weekends for those churches, and I could at least spend the night, get back to my house maybe at midnight, but at least I could come back to my own house at night and be with the family. And pretty soon, about 1.5 years, 2 years in, we really started to pursue camp ministry. And we did that for a number of years, wanting really, for a while, thinking that camp would be the story of our lives in Peru, the camp ministry, that would be the main thing we would give ourselves to. We started looking for camp property, started doing camps, just renting properties and doing camps. And there were 2 things that the Lord really, that seemed to hold us back, and we weren't sure what the Lord was doing or why it was happening this way. One of them was the issue of property. Lima is a large city in a desert where there's not a lot of camp-type countryside property, places where you can really do camp well. And so you have little supply and a high demand, and so the prices are actually outrageous. So, I mean, you have, to get a piece of property that would be a reasonable size, we were looking at maybe a 20-acre piece of property, not that large. with nothing on it, no buildings, no development, but close enough to Lima to serve well, because Lima was the hub for us, and that's where most of the churches are at and where the people would come from. And a property like that wasn't going to be less than $1.5 million. And we thought, well, one, we didn't have that much money. Two, I didn't even think I should try to go out and raise that much money. And we kept running up against that, looking here, looking at this property, looking over there, this part, would this work? Could we do a smaller property? And it wasn't falling into place. And we were just asking the Lord, why is that? What do you want to do? We kept running a week or two of camp every year. And that was something we kept running up against. Another thing was the people. The Lord is putting some great people in our path to work with us, and yet it didn't seem to quite fit right for camp ministry. An example is the young guy that's actually with us in a church plant now, that's the co-pastor with me. At one point, he came to us and said, Tim, I really want to work with you long term. And basically it was, if it's camp ministry, okay, but his heart was really in local church ministry. And he was one example of several where some great people to work with this, but it didn't seem to be the right fit long-term for camp ministry. Well, about 5 years ago, the Lord, actually 7 years ago, in 2012, the church that we always attended when I wasn't preaching elsewhere, just a small church there in Lima, the pastor stepped down, and the people asked if I would interim pastor for a period of time. So the Lord had been moving in my heart and Cheryl's heart that we, when that opportunity came along, we were interested in that and wanted to help the people. And I had a desire to do some pastoral work, which the Lord was just starting to form in my heart. And so we said, we think this is what the Lord wants us to do. The camp is not falling into place yet. There's still going to be some time before that happens. And so we began to do that. Ended up doing that for 4 years until the church was able to call a Peruvian pastor and have a transition there. And in that time, the Lord began to burden our hearts for church planting. And there was about a 6-month period where I didn't even talk to Cheryl. I was just thinking about it and praying about it. The desire the Lord was forming in my heart was to go to downtown Lima, where we could interact with a broader range of Peruvian Lima society, high class, low class, working class, business class, a chance to have interaction with people from just a broader range of backgrounds. And also there really wasn't a church down in that area faithfully preaching the gospel and faithfully really doing local church ministry down there. There's a lot of Baptist churches in Lima, but most of them have been planted or have been started on what I would call the outskirts of the city, where people over the last 50 years have flooded into Lima, poor sections of the city. And the Lord was burdening our hearts to go downtown to some of the older parts of Lima where the people are more established. The district of Lima that actually was our target district and where we meet now as a church is only about a block and a half from that district. It's right where we want to be. Well, the name of that district is Jesus Maria, Jesus Mary. And it wasn't the Protestants that named it that, in case you're wondering. And some just old, long Catholic traditions there. Families that have been there for a long time. And that's where the Lord was burdening our hearts to go down and plant a church. So the Lord just really moved our hearts eventually away from camp ministry. Besides the people and the property issues, the other thing the Lord was doing in my heart was this. I began to realize that there were some needs in the local churches there that I was seeing that from a camp ministry, I felt like we couldn't really meet all of those needs. We couldn't really address them all. Camp ministry is wonderful. It really is a great help, if done well, to local churches. But a camp can't and shouldn't tell a church how they ought to do church, or it can't correct local church philosophy if there's really issues there, and it's to come alongside of churches and help them. Well, we were seeing some needs in the churches that I thought, man, I don't know if camp ministry is the best way to help address that. And the Lord was burdening our hearts if we believe certain things about local church, something as simple as the faithful exposition of Scripture that we just didn't see happening in a lot of the churches down there. Well, if I believe that, then I probably should go start a church and begin to do that. And that's some of the ways the Lord began to direct our hearts to plant a church and then to do it in downtown Lima. Well, the Lord's been good, and He has raised up a church, and He's done it really doing some very special things. We're in a place where what the Lord, we just have seen the Lord's timing, because when we went downtown, we found that there were people living in those areas, those districts in the center part of the city, looking for a church. God had been moving in their hearts, and they wanted to be fed. They want a local church where the fellowship is Christ-centered and genuine, where, and some of this, I'm going to mention some things that really have to do with the way church is done, and a lot of just a variety of churches, evangelical, Protestant churches in Lima. A lot of people were looking for a church where the pastors were not manipulative, where everything wasn't about tithing and pressure, and there's a lot of prosperity gospel churches, charismatic churches, where it's very manipulative and very much about what you do and controlling. Some of the stories, if I took time to tell them to you, would be shocking, I think, to you. People were, what we found is there are people in those churches genuinely seeking God and not finding answers because the Bible's not being preached to them faithfully. And there's not real Christ-centered fellowship taking place. And so 3 years ago, actually the church 1 month ago celebrated 3 years. About 3.5 years ago, we were able to finish with the church, Gethsemane, where I've been interim pastoring. And then we began to meet with this core group. What the Lord allowed us to have is what we just called a core group. The way it played out was this. This young fellow, Ruben, and I'll show you his picture in a moment, the Lord had really moved in his heart to want to work with us. And when I said, listen, I think the Lord's calling us to go plant a church in downtown Lima, he said, I would love to be a part of that. And he already had he was finishing up his ministerial training at a Bible college there in Peru. And so we were able to start with a small team, our family and Ruben. And then the Lord put together a few other families that wanted to leave the churches they were with and come join with us in planting this new church. Now, there were actually 3 families that I talked to. We had lived at that point in Peru for 9 years. We knew a lot of people in camp ministry. We'd met a lot of people. And there are actually 3 Peruvian families that I, in different points and different ways, talked to and said, would you consider coming with us in the church plant? Would you consider, with your church's blessing, leaving your church and joining us in this new project to plant a church downtown? Not a one of those 3 families came with us. In other words, the ones that I picked were not the ones the Lord wanted. The families that actually came with us, and there were, I think, three other families primarily that came with us. Again, they were not the ones that I picked, but they were the ones that by far I can look back now and see they were the right choice. In that group, let me just tell you briefly, we had in that group 2 men who are just very warm and friendly with people. They're the kind of people that when you come to when you arrive at church, they make you feel welcome. Well, that's really important in a church plant. It's really important in any church, but especially in a new church. We had in the group musicians, 2 preachers. We had a lady who just blesses people by cooking, and she wins them over by her cooking. That's a real blessing. A couple of different ladies, my wife and one other, that could teach Sunday school. And one of the young men, one of the young husbands, a young couple, he's good with technology, very faithful. He was, from the beginning, as our treasurer and also just handles all of our technology stuff. And the Lord just put together a great team to plant a church with. Again, it was His doing. So we began meeting, met with that core group 5 times, 5 Sundays. We pulled our resources. We said, this is going to be a church by God's grace, so let's begin giving. And we found after a month of giving that we had enough to rent a small auditorium. So we began to rent the auditorium and passed out about 6,000 invitations for the opening service of a new church. And we had a bunch of our friends from other churches come and help us out that first Sunday. That first Sunday, we had about 70 people. The next Sunday, we dropped down to 30. But that was with the core group, about 15 or 20 of us. And already the Lord was starting to bring in other people. People were finding us. Ruben worked very hard on the social networks because all the Peruvians are connected on the internet. And so the Lord just began to lead people to find our church. And it was very neat in the beginning. In about 5 or 6 months, we grew up to about 50 or 55 people. The small auditorium that we had was, we outgrew it. And so we moved to another place, a bigger place. Not very nice, to be honest. A lot of times the guy wouldn't show up to open for us, or he'd be late. We would find the place not clean. And yet it was a bigger auditorium, so we could grow a little bit more. And then the Lord, about a year and a half ago, led us to this place. This is actually the fourth floor. We rent the fourth floor of what used to be just a Bible bookstore, but it's actually a Bible printing, a Bible distribution society. It's called the Peruvian Bible Society. They've been in Peru about 70 years. And 3 years ago, they built this nice, modern, 5-story building, and we rent the fourth floor. So we have this main room and 2 other small rooms. And when we left in February, average on Sundays about 90 to 100 people. And the Lord's just raised up a church, and it's just been exciting to be a part of it. And the offerings have continued to grow. The church pays for its rent, which isn't cheap in downtown Lima, so we're able to pay for our rent. The church pays a decent salary to Ruben, who got married about a year and a half ago to he and his wife. Allowed them to minister there with us full time, and the Lord's just been very good. So let me show you some pictures of some of the people here. Before I do that, I just want to mention one thing. If you could summarize what it is, if I could summarize really what I believe the Lord's purpose for us with this church in downtown Lima is, probably the phrase that best sums it up would be what I call clarity, or the clarification of the gospel. Gospel clarity. See, a lot of people that are coming to our church have had some church background, but the gospel was not very clear to them. A lot of them have come from what we call prosperity gospel, which, by the way, is a different gospel. It's the gospel that if I do the right things, then God accepts me. And that's actually the opposite of the biblical gospel. The gospel says, I'm accepted because of what Jesus Christ did. And based on that, I go out and I love and I serve and I seek good works and all of those things, and I give and I should be generous. But the order makes all the difference. The order is, I'm justified in Christ and accepted in Him, loved by Him. We love Him because He first loved us. That's the true gospel. And so what do I do Sunday after Sunday? And what do I do in private conversations and in small group meetings? It's really clarity of the gospel, just clarifying week after week the gospel for these people. And they are growing in grace, responding, learning to love Jesus Christ for who He is, not for what He can give them. Not just for what He can give them. And they're people just like us, so they have problems and difficulties and issues, and yet the Lord's given us some great group of people that really want to grow in Christ. And so let me just show you some of them. You probably are aware, hopefully, of what's happening in Venezuela right now. It is a terrible, terrible crisis. About 3 years ago, Venezuelans started to pour into Peru in great numbers. In the last 3 years, we have just in Lima, just in the capital city, we've added over 600,000 Venezuelans. And so we certainly feel their presence in the city. This young couple showed up at the church about a year and a half, a little bit less than 2 years ago. And they were the first of many that have started to come to our church now. On any given Sunday in our church, there'll be 15 to 20 Venezuelans. And just pray for them. This young couple, been there in Peru 2 years now, still struggling economically to make life work. It's funny because a lot of these Venezuelans come well-trained. Meili, the wife there, has her PhD in chemistry from Spain, a university in Spain. They moved back to Venezuela about 4 years ago thinking just to have a short transition, go back to Spain and look for work. Things got so bad in Venezuela, they lost their chance to leave the country and go back to Spain. They began to look elsewhere, and they ended up moving to Peru. And the Lord had been working in their hearts along gospel lines. They really hadn't had much training or grounding, but they knew enough. They needed to find a gospel preaching church, and they found us online. They were living near our church and started attending, and the Lord's been doing some good things in their hearts. So pray for Carlos and Meili. In fact, just this weekend, they're moving out of one apartment to another because they have to find a cheaper place to live, and it's still not easy for them. But when you think of us, pray for the Venezuelans there. The crisis continues, and it's very difficult for them. Here's Ruben and Laura. Ruben and Laura. Ruben's the other pastor with us. He's preaching almost every Sunday in our absence. He and Laura leading there in our absence. And just pray for them. They're a great young couple, and it's a privilege to work with them. They need to continue to grow, and but it sure is a blessing to work with someone else that we trust and to be able to share the leadership with them. Here's some of the young people in the church. Really, the Lord's doing some neat things. The girl there at the top in the yellow, kind of orangish shirt there, her name is Maylene. She came to me about 4 or 5 months ago and said, I want to learn to teach. I want to be able to teach a book of the Bible or something like that. She said, would you help me? Would you give me some guidance? I said, okay. I said, you pick a book of the Bible and I'll start giving you steps and how to go about that. And so she said, I want to study the book of Ruth, okay? And so she's been doing a tremendous job. I just tell her what the next assignment is, how to go about studying the text and breaking it down into divisions. And I set a deadline, and she does the material, gets it back to me. And excuse me. And it's been really neat because the Lord is using that study to really grow her and what she's coming up with. There's really some great work that she'll be able to use long term. And more than that, it's just her to see her desire to grow and want to teach and minister is wonderful. The young man there on the right, at the bottom right below me, down at the very bottom of that picture, his name is Juan Jesus. And his dad is a pastor of a church and a Pentecostal church. Juan Jesus, about 4 years ago, came to the conclusion that he couldn't stay in his dad's church because it really was a different doctrine and a different practice. And so he graciously, left the church, really very graciously, began to look for a church, found our church, and he's just been growing in the Lord and loves the Word on his own. He signed up to take some theology classes online. And just the Lord, these are two examples of just some of the young people there and the neat things the Lord's doing in their lives. Here's some of the families the Lord's brought to the church. The Lord's working in different ways in them, growing them. The Leon family there at the bottom, Aldo, he lives in constant fear that he could actually go to jail. From what I can tell, not because of any fault of his own. He worked for the mayor of Lima's office, and his signature is on some documents that really were involved with corruption in the city, which is all over the city. And because his signature appears on some of those documents, he's wrapped up in corruption that, from what I can tell, has nothing to do with him, with people higher than him, but he's basically the scapegoat for them. And so he doesn't have the money to hire a good lawyer. He has to take the lawyer that the government provides for him, which doesn't do a good job for him. And yet Aldo, with all the different struggles in his life, he really is seeking to grow in the Lord. And he's the kind of guy that when I'm preaching something and something connects, you can just see it all over his face and his response. And he's growing in grace. And his family as well. Two of his daughters come with him to church there. I had the privilege to baptize one of his daughters about half a year ago, and it's been neat to really see them grow. There's some young people in the last, about 3 months that have started, last 5 months have started to come. One of them is a young girl. I don't have her picture, but she She got saved, I think, very recently. Just been very neat to see her come out of a Catholic background and come to understand the gospel and just grow in the Lord. She gave a testimony at the church anniversary a month ago. Ruben sent me a copy of her testimony, and she quoted 4 different songs that we sing in our church. I've never seen anybody give a testimony and quote that many different songs. So the Lord is ministering to her heart, not just through the preaching, but through the music, through hearing songs, and they're sticking in her mind, and they're ministering and answering needs and her understanding of the gospel and her learning to trust in the Lord and so forth. And so the Lord's just doing some neat things, and we are really grateful for that. Let me finish with this. This young man, Daniel, is Peruvian. His wife, soon-to-be wife, they're not married yet. They're going to be married in the next couple of months, Lord willing. She is from Argentina. They met in Mexico, where Daniel went to prepare for ministry. And Daniel is actually back in Peru now, finishing up his work for his studies, distance learning. And then he'll receive his degree, Lord willing, in the next few weeks. Bible college degree from actually a Christian university in Mexico, where actually I have 3 siblings that work and teach there. And 2 of them full-time missions work there, and another one just there working and ministering in the school. And so they will begin working with us in what's going to be the beginning of what we're going to call just our pastoral intern program. Now, we want to have a pastoral intern program there with one specific purpose. We really do want to train pastors. But in our minds, it is the vision, the goal for us is that we want the church to be a church-planting church. So Iglesia Bautista Gracia, Grace Baptist Church, we're in the center of the capital city. So there's really no other place in the country that we would think that is more strategic as far as a church planting, the location for a church planting church. The people there in the church understand that I can stay on pastoring as the lead pastor for a while if we become a church planting church. And that's really what we believe God is doing for us. We believe He's placed us there, that He's growing a church so that we can have one of the reasons that we can have a place where we can train pastors, future pastors, and then send them out to to plant churches. And so we'd love to be able to send out teams of guys, maybe even with a core group out of our church, to be able to plant other churches in the city of Lima. And so we understand that to do that, we need to train pastors. And so Daniel is 25 or 26. He has his Bible college training. We want to have take him and his wife in, soon-to-be wife, for 2 years, Lord willing. And let me just tell you what this, kind of just show you what we're looking at with this pastoral intern program. The purpose is to train future pastors for church planting ministry in urban centers throughout Latin America. So in Lima, other cities within Peru, and even other cities within Latin America. We'd love to just see the Lord allow us to have a constant flow of future pastors, young men, coming through our church and being involved in this church planting or this church pastoral intern program with a specific focus toward church planting. Now, what are the details of what's the plan? It is a 2-year program focused on these 5 areas: spiritual formation, pastoral mentorship, ministry preparation, specifically church planting ministry preparation, theological grounding. I'm going to have them reading a lot of books and lots of theological conversation. I want to make sure they're well grounded theologically. And then Bible exposition, really teaching them to exposit the Word, to preach and teach, so that when we send them out eventually, that they're really well prepared with ministry experience. 2 years is not a long time, so it might extend out to a further 3rd or 4th year. We'll see how the Lord lays that out. But that's really the plan. And then as far as the reason I mentioned it to you, one, we want you to pray. Specifically, the Lord would allow our church to see that program unfold. And pray for Daniel, and Jessica as they begin that with us here. And then also, we're just encouraging churches and individuals to consider a one-time gift. Our church there toward the program, our church in Lima is committed financially to the project. Actually, this year, 10% of our giving is going to this program. But we're going to need more than that to be able to give these guys a part-time salary. We want them working some kind of a secular job part-time, but to be able to give them something so they can give 20 hours a week or more to the ministry, to the program, and be able to pay for conferences for them, books, and other things like that. So the Lord will move in your heart to have a part in that, either individually or as a church. On the back on our table, we have just a little flyer that will tell you more about that and how you can have a part in that. We have prayer cards on the back. We'd love for you to take one of those and pray for us. And also, if you'd like to receive our email updates, I send out something once a quarter. And so just put your name and your email. Make sure your email address is legible. And I will add you to our list there. So, Pastor, thank you so much for the chance to share with you guys. And your prayers and just interest in what we're doing is a great blessing to us. We're really thankful.